Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the London Borough of Newham Crime and Antisocial Behaviour Scrutiny Commission. Can everybody present hear me? Give me a nod or just give me a thumbs up. Fantastic, thank you very much. This evening's meeting will be held virtually via Zoom. The Council has decided that whilst we're in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, public meetings will be held virtually for the meantime to keep councillors, officers and members of the public as safe as possible. Members of the public will be able to view this meeting via Newham's YouTube page. For this meeting, we will be aided by Roger Raymond and Richard Plummer to assist councillors and officers with technology. May I ask members to note that they must raise their hand in order to indicate that they wish to speak. And I also want to remind members that if a vote is taken at any time, it will be by way of raising your hand like so, in order so that we can capture this on the screen. This meeting of the London Borough of Newham Crime and Antisocial Behaviour Scrutiny Commission is now called to order. Item number 1, introductions and welcome. I would like to welcome everybody to this meeting. Thank you for coming along. And I would specifically like to wish a warm welcome to Councillor Patel, and it's nice to see him back after his illness. Welcome, Councillor Patel. Item number 2, apologies for absence. Does any member or officers have any apologies? Roger?
Councillor Bailey and Councillor Masters may attend later. Thank you.
I do have some apologies. Councillor Kitchen, also Councillor Griffiths as well. Thank you very much. Moving swiftly on. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Are there any members wishing to make any declarations of interest at this time? Okay, fantastic. Moving on, item number 4, minutes of the previous meeting. The minutes from the last meeting on the 20th of October 2020 will be agreed at our next meeting. Item number 5. We're on to the first of our substantive items, the update on Newham community-based domestic and sexual violence support services. The committee is delighted to welcome to this meeting Councillor Zulfikar Ali, Cabinet Member for Health and Adult Social Care, Simon Whitlock, Senior Commissioner for Adults and Health, Meryl Easton Parker, Director of London Black Women's Project, Shana Marshall, Service Manager for Hestia, Chief Inspector, Matt Casey, Safeguarding for North East Basic Command Units, Fiona Hackland, Assistant Director of Commissioning Adults and Health, Mana Ahmed, Services Manager for London Black Women's Project, Tamara White, the Area Manager for Hestia, Councillor James Beckles, Cabinet Member for Crime and Community Safety, and last but very much not least, Alva Bailey, Assistant Director of Community Safety. Thank you very much for joining and thank you very much for coming along. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to give some opening remarks. So can we start off with Councillor Beckles or Councillor Ali? Would you like to kick us off and then we'll go on to the other witnesses?
If I may, Chair, with your permission, first of all, thank you yourself and indeed the Commission to ask us to come and provide you an update with respect to domestic and sexual violence, particularly during the COVID period. Chair, as you know, that COVID-19 has had a very devastating impact, particularly during the first phase in Newham, where we have had a disproportionate impact on our community and resulting in a loss of number of lives, unfortunately. But with this area, as you, I'm sure, are aware that nationally there's been a huge media reporting with respect to the increase in cases of domestic and sexual violence. And this is something that we have been very closely monitoring and watching along with our colleagues here. And can I also say, I'm grateful to all our colleagues and partners for their presence here today to give you evidence from their front line experiences. And I mean, as you've read in the report, Chair, we do have community-based service provision provided both by Hestia and London Black Women's Group, which is solely to make sure that we have adequate arrangements to deal with any unforeseen situation that may arise during the COVID-19. And in fact, we slightly increased the provision with the London Black Women's Group just to make sure that demand is met if there is any. But I'm pleased in a way to say that we haven't had any substantial increase, compared with the rest of the country during the situation, so far. But that doesn't mean that things won't go back to what it is like in other part of the country after the second lockdown ends, or whatever happens to the COVID situation in due course. So we are monitoring situation very, very closely with all our partners to make sure that if there are any cases of substantial nature that we need to deal with, then we have adequate provision and capacity to tackle those issues. But this is something that is very, very
20 seconds, Councillor.
yeah, I'll be finishing very quickly, Chair. I mean, this is a service area that we monitor very, very closely, and I'm grateful to our partners for their engagement, support, and a true partnership spirit in the difficult time that we had during COVID-19 for making this work and enabling us to make sure that we have a collective approach in helping those victims of on these unfortunate crimes. So without further ado, I will close there, and if I can ask Fiona if you'd like to introduce the detailed report, if you like, or if you wish to proceed to the questions or ask individual witnesses. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'm going to go to Councillor Beckles if he does have anything that he wishes to add at this point.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for calling me again towards this meeting. We face challenging times, not least due to COVID and the second pandemic and the second lockdown. But challenges bring opportunities, and I look forward to discussing the information in the pack on noise nuisance and the community safety restructure. Community safety is a partnership effort, and it's in that partnership that we learn new things, and we also remain a key player in that. So I look forward to having further discussion with members, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Beckles. Can I now call Simon or Fiona, whoever wants to give some opening remarks out of the two of you? Thank you.
Can I just do some very quick remarks and then hand over to Simon for the body of the report, Councillor?
Up to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'll take less than that. So I just to reflect that I think that we previously came to the Scrutiny Commission, I think, in April of 2019, and then obviously have been overtaken by events, not least the pandemic since then. But part of the report, we were asked to come back and specifically give an update on the progress of the service that we were then commissioning, which is now provided by Hestia. And then we've also answered some supplementary questions which members were kind enough to give to us, which probably are slightly more COVID specific. So Simon will take us through both of those.
Thank you very much. Before we go to Simon, actually, Meryl, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, just that, obviously London Black Women's Project, like every other service, was impacted by COVID-19. And I think, from feedback I've had from the previous interim director, the organisation acted really swiftly. And, I think as a result of that, to date, we've had no records or how can I say, feedback from service users about anybody that's been COVID positive. So that's a good thing.
Thank you very much, Meryl. Just before we go on, Simon, Hestia, did Tamara or Shana, did any of you want to speak and just say some opening remarks before we go on to hear the full presentation?
Yeah, I mean, nothing in particular. Obviously, we'll go through the presentation, but just to say, yeah, we're pleased to be here and happy to answer any sort of questions that come as a result of the report. Having worked very hard throughout COVID, obviously implementing the service that started in June last year. So this was in our first year of service here, having to make numerous changes as a result of the pandemic. But so far, so good. So yeah, happy to answer any questions as a result of the report too.
Okay, thank you very much. Chief Inspector Matt Casey, do you want to say anything before we go into this report?
Hi, thanks, Chair. So very briefly, I'll sort of give some context just for 1 minute and say that obviously from a domestic abuse point of view, it's been a really challenging year, not just due to COVID, but that's definitely contributed. I think it's no surprise to say that recorded domestic abuse offences have risen throughout the year since February. I think that sort of reflects a national picture. And some of the methods we use to safeguard some of the most vulnerable in our society have been frustrated by the fact that people have been at home so much. As we often say, domestic abusers always work from home. I know that sounds a bit cliche, but it's just a fact of point. So that has made safeguarding the vulnerable more difficult. But that said, I think during this period, our partnership with local authorities, service providers, Hestia, etc., has been exceptionally strong, and that's given us some great opportunities. And hopefully I'll get the opportunity to answer some questions around a police angle for DA and give you some reassurances around the fact that Newham, in terms of a criminal justice outcome, is comfortably higher than any other borough in London in terms of how many offenders we bring to justice, and indeed some of the other less obvious safeguarding measures that we put in place around our victims. So hopefully we'll get the chance to talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Inspector. Simon, are you ready to give us the full presentation?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Cool. So what I'll do is I'll run through the main report, which was the update on Newham community-based domestic and sexual violence support services and also the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. And then there's also some supplementary questions, as Fiona mentioned. So I'll sort of lightly touch on them, and if there's any sort of questions or follow-up or anything like that, I think we've got a lot of experience here between the two services, and Fiona and myself, and Matt as well, in terms of being able to answer any questions, any follow-ups. So as sort of Fiona mentioned, the sort of the context behind some of the update around Hestia was that the community-based services were being recommissioned previously, and in June 2019, Hestia were awarded the integrated community-based domestic and sexual violence support service, and that's a combination of 7 elements of services. So it brought the previous offer, which was a range of different, the same services but under different contracts, under a one-stop shop. So this contract that we awarded in 2019 bring those all together as one integrated offer, which is co-located across the borough. And that service was fully embedded following the implementation period by October 2019. So the first year of the service, running from sort of start to finish, is June to May. So activity-wise, what we've seen. Sorry. Let me just I'll go through the elements of the service. I think that will be help everyone on the in the commission to understand the full range of the service. So the integrated part of the service, the integrated community domestic sexual violence support service, is made up of sort of low to medium risk casework service. Then there's the high risk independent domestic and sexual violence advocacy services, so the IDVAs. It includes the female genital mutilation support and prevention service, and our exiting sex work service. And it also includes the specialist domestic abuse court coordination, and the MARAC coordination, so the high risk sort of multi-agency response around domestic abuse coordination function, and also a floating support service that supports victims and survivors of domestic abuse that have been housed sort of in temporary accommodation. So I say that service fully embedded from October 2019, and during the first year of the service has seen over 1,700 referrals and engaged with over 884 service users during that period of time. And it's worth pointing out that that's on a relatively sort of small service capacity of sort of 12 full-time equivalents across the borough, just over 12 full-time equivalents across the whole borough. To put that into context, the previous service under the one-stop banner, sort of a similar 12-month period, saw around just over 1,100 referrals during that period. So we've seen an increase coming through the service with this co-located model. There's the other work that the service is engaged with, which is around the sort of the promotion and awareness training, and working with professionals. So seeing the service makes some really good relationships with a number of different partners across the borough. And you know, from the monitoring, we've seen that there's over sort of 600 professionals that have been sort of reached through sort of training on awareness sessions, which includes sort of specific domestic sexual violence awareness training and FGM awareness sessions and sort of attendance in community events to raise the profile of the service. There is also an appendix to this report, Appendix 1, which kind of gives a full overview, I think, of the service on a page. I guess if anyone wanted to kind of look at that, and really helps to understand sort of the structure of the service that we've commissioned, where it's co-located, and also the value of the contract. So just to draw you to that. I suppose sort of like looking ahead, so if I just sort of, you know, that's the service in a nutshell in terms of the performance throughout the year. There's parts looking ahead to sort of like the second year, I suppose, of activities. So we've worked with Hestia quite closely around sort of like the annual development of the service, areas to focus on, and just to sort of draw your to something to the points within that service plan, I think are relevant in terms of where the service is focusing its resources and attention in the next year, is around the sort of increasing utilisation of the service and through ensuring that it's culturally appropriate with public communications, which we hope would obviously encourage more sort of self-referrals. Also looking at developing the outreach function, specifically working with sort of community and faith-based organisations to raise awareness of domestic abuse and the support that's available in the borough. And continuing on that theme around working with community and faith organisations to ensure that the service really remains culturally appropriate and, you know, is meeting the needs of Newham residents. There's a lot of work going on around the exiting sex work part of the service. Where we're looking at also sort of like, you know, in line with COVID as well, looking at options to provide secure drop-in spaces for engagement with sex work. And sort of other areas around developing the training offered for the community and sort of utilisation of sort of like peer support groups and the volunteers services, like running remote activity sessions with volunteers and things. So that's the kind of the headlines, I think, from the service. Could draw your attention to sort of section 4.5 in the report, which is kind of a bit of a sort of service profile, I guess, to really give a kind of a snapshot, I guess, of the service activity, the demographics of the service, and the types of abuse that come through the service around sort of like prevalence. So there's some interesting sort of graphics there and the breakdown of the, because obviously this is a service for men and women, so you can see the percentage there of female to male, so 97% are female, 3% are male. As you can see through this, through the numbers there, sort of like over 85%, 87% are from service users from a BAME community, and the sort of the age ranges, you know, highest age ranges are between sort of 26 and 45. So it's quite a spread of engagement. The service also has around 3% of service users that identify as LGBTQ, and you can see sort of like the referral sources there. The sort of like 4 main referral sources there in order of sort of prevalence. There is CYPS being the main referrer at 27%, and then followed by sort of self-referrals at 13%, and police at 10%, followed by referrals through MARAC at 9%. And you can also see from the sort of the graphs down at the bottom there, or of that page, around the types of abuse. So it's quite interesting picture there around that. Obviously, physical, is the number one primary recorded abuse, but you can see how coercive control, emotional, and financial and psychological are very heavily factored in the reporting there. Factor in all four of those kind of areas. So that's Hestia for the first year. Also, just to draw your attention, in the report, I sort of mentioned that the council commissions two community-based services. The other one is London Black Women's Project, who we commissioned to provide the women's refuge in the borough. So we commissioned them to provide 25 beds in the borough. Currently, that number is higher because we've been able to work together with the London Black Women's Project to be able to secure funding for additional capacity. So on top of the 25, there's another 10 beds that are supported through a joint bid from the London Borough of Newham and London Black Women's Project for MHCLG funding, which provides an extra 10 beds, and the funding we also receive provides additional access to counselling and family support. And the London Black Women's Project has also been successful in securing, I think, another 5 other beds from external funding sources. So overall, there's around a sort of 40 bed capacity at the moment, which has obviously been very useful in terms of COVID and support there. We've worked very well with the London Black Women's Project over the course of the year. It's been obviously very challenging in terms of the challenges that they faced, in terms of the biggest challenges being around sort of move on. It's obviously there's just not enough kind of suitable accommodation to support move on for sort of the women and children that are supported by the organisation. So that has a knock-on effect in terms of the length of time that women and children can spend in the refuge, and also statuses as well, in terms of, do they have settled status, and immigration issues can also be a challenge as well. But we've worked very closely with the London Black Women's Project around some of these challenges, and they're incredibly experienced at dealing with these challenges. So I suppose just to draw your attention as well to the recommissioning.
I think Simon is frozen. Can everybody hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
It's just Simon. Fiona, can you pick up? Do you think?
Of service.
Oh,
so it's
hold on, Simon.
Simon, to allow.
Simon.
Yeah.
Sorry, you cut out for about 20 seconds, maybe 20 to 25 seconds. You just froze on our screen. So
sorry.
No, it's not your fault.
If you could go back to the recommissioning
recommissioning,
point,
that's what we lost it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
That's
no
okay,
worries.
thank you.
Yeah, so just saying, November 2019, Cabinet obviously took the decision to discontinue the recommissioning to allow for the council's community wealth building strategy to influence the future procurement strategy. So I have actually made a little bit of a typo in the report, sorry, on 3.4. It should actually be December 21 in terms of when we are expecting to recommission the service. That is clarified a bit further down in the report, actually. And so we've made good steps in terms of working towards that, but that's obviously been slightly delayed through the impact of COVID and resources being diverted elsewhere. So actually leads me nicely into the kind of the impact around COVID. So as I think officers mentioned, there's been a huge impact of COVID's affected everyone, massively across the borough in lots of different ways, and the services have seen strain equally. But as a highlight in the report, we've worked very closely with both providers, London Black Women's Project and Hestia, to make sure that They've been plugged into all the resources that they need to be plugged into, and we've supported them where we can. We've been very impressed with both services, the resilience that they've shown, and the support to the borough and the residents. It's been second to none. So it's worth highlighting as well, the measures we sort of put in place to observe any spikes. So as Matt alluded to earlier in his opening remarks, is that there has been sort of nationally a spike in referrals to domestic abuse support services, and so as a as a kind of preemptive kind of measure, we put in place a kind of a weekly collection of data from various different sources to highlight whether there so we could see in real time if there were any spikes across the partnership. And we also established a working group of various different partners where we would...
2 more minutes, 2 more minutes.
Oh, okay, sorry. So I draw your attention to 5.3. So that's the COVID dashboard that we collated, where you could see the data we were collecting from the different sources. I think it's fair to say that we didn't see a very large spike in Newham, but we did see gradual increases in other areas like MASH, children's MASH, and the Hestia service did see an increase. And the support we put in place to be able to work with the services included, for Hestia, where there was a temporary 6-month 25% contract uplift, which allowed for additional capacity around referrals and IDFAs. And with the London Black Women's Project, we obviously had the funding that we had gotten from MHCLG, which allowed us to increase the beds. And certain elements, for instance, like the exiting sex work, we were able to get that back up and running by April very quickly with the support of Hestia, and supporting access to PPE, which obviously at that time was very difficult. It was a very challenging time to get access to PPE. So we supported that. And the same with the refuge, where we were able to support access to PPE, which then allowed the refuge to continue to take on safely new residents as required, because it was challenging times to put new residents into those situations and move at the risk of causing infection, spreading infection. Trying to think what else to highlight.
To be honest, I'm going to have to bring it to an end there.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. I think, thank you very much. I think you covered quite a lot of ground. I just want to open it up to members because we do have 3 items to get through this meeting. So thank you very much. We really do appreciate your detailed analysis. Does any member have any questions at this point? Councillor Garfield, I see you. Thank you.
Going to my notes. On page 5, item 4.9, you'll probably get there before I will. Here we go. So it states that the GLA will be taking responsibility for the procurement of the refuges, but it also says that officers are continuing to plan and commission the services, as it is not yet clear how the GLA will assume this responsibility. Are plans being put in place as a hypothetical situation so that we're ready for the eventuality when it comes? Because what I foresee is the GLA giving incredibly unhelpfully little notice to how it's going to switch over, and us not being ready, and it would be good to get ahead of that if possible.
If I can answer that, Councillor, we are trying very hard to get an answer out of both MHCLG, which is kind of leading on this, and the GLA as to what those arrangements will be, and when they will come into place. And we haven't as yet. I'd be interested to know whether any of our colleagues actually from the services know that, because it affects them probably more profoundly than it affects us, in a sense, in terms of contracts changing. What I can say is that...
Oh.
Sorry?
No, you froze there on my screen. I'm not
Sorry.
sure if it was everybody else's, but you just go back 10 seconds. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, so we don't have any great level of detail from the GLA. There have been a couple of consultations from MHCLG initially on quite a few things to do with the domestic abuse bill, including this, which we responded to. And in the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's been a consultation on what they're planning as the funding allocation for Tier 1 local authorities, but which in London will be the GLA for this, which we've responded to. But there is precious little detail. And I think all we can do at the moment is keep pushing for detail and proceeding as though it may not happen in the short term, because we need to have a refuge provision in place and we need to get on with our procurement, basically.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Councillor Garfield, do you have a supplementary?
I wanted to know whether you think you had, or we have, enough information to put together some contingencies so that if the notice is very short, there isn't a lag or a backlog is created, or there isn't a situation where worst case scenario referrals aren't being heard on time because of the lack of contingency.
So again, colleagues from LBWP might be better able to answer this, but referrals tend to either come from local services or from there's a kind of national referral system which comes through from Women's Aid. Most often, women actually from Newham wouldn't go to the refuge in Newham for safety reasons. They will go to refuges elsewhere in the country. So a lot of the women coming into our one will come from elsewhere. So in some senses, it's a national resource rather than a kind of a local resource. I can only say the only contingency that we can put into place with the lack of information we currently have is to continue as though it's not happening, and just make sure that we actually do have adequate provision, and that we commission the service that we would want to commission locally within Newham until we get further detail about how actually it will be managed from the GLA. But there is an astonishing lack of information.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ali, I'll give you 1 minute to come in and comment.
I'll be very quick, Chair. That's a very good question, the Councillor Garfield had. I mean, clearly, we are still waiting for detailed information from GLA in terms of what's going to happen. I think the key thing is that we will make sure that when they do procure and they ask for us for the historic information and the data and statistics, etc., that we make sure that there's enough capacity for contingency plans as part of the bigger picture in London. Thank you, Chair.
No worries. Does any other member have a question? Councillor Patel, I think you had your hand up. Do you withdraw your question? Or?
Yeah, I had my hand up. I thought I would have emailed. Thus, I want to know, regarding the domestic abuse, how many children directly affect, and what sort of, help we are providing them, the family or the children? I think Fiona or anybody can answer that.
So you might need to see a magnifying glass to see it, but some of the information that's in the it's I think page 10 of the report is 0.5.3 on the dashboard. One of the places that we've been gathering information from has actually been children's safeguarding as well as adult safeguarding. So so it's the weekly MASH content. So you'll be able to see the numbers there in terms of children who've been in families where domestic abuse might be a factor when it was actually the main presenting issue. In some senses, that there's a large part of the offer that's provided to those children that comes from actually from the Children's Directorate to do that. There will be work. LBWP do have some of the service they have is for women with accompanying children, but again, they're probably from out of borough. Again, we weren't able to get to because there's a lot of information there, but if you continue to look at the report, at some point we talk about the New Day project, which is the project within children's, which specifically works with families affected by domestic abuse, and there are a number of things that they do. So I think you'll find a fuller answer in there, Councillor Patel.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you, Councillor Salim. My question's for Meryl from London Black Women's Project. What were the challenges for your organisation under the previous tendering framework? Because I do remember at the time there was, quite a lot of hullabaloo over this. There was, protests outside the council. What were the challenges that you faced as an organisation during this period? Thank you, Meryl.
I don't know, to be quite honest with you, I don't know where I can fully answer that question because I joined London Black Women's Project in August of this year. So I'm
fine.
fairly new, but what I can do is I can go back and have a look at the, you know, any historical document and then come back to the group next time we meet. Yeah.
No worries, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much, and I really do
Mm.
appreciate that. The reason why I asked the question is because
Mhm.
I know community wealth building is something that this administration is very
Mhm.
keen on, and I think it's really important that we do work with local providers, not just in this sector, but also in all the sectors of the Newham economy.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to make sure that any of the humps and bumps that you found that maybe were preventing you from previously being successful in this framework are
Yeah.
kind of ironed out, so that local providers are not disenfranchised from actually
Yeah.
securing contracts from the council. That was the
Yeah.
thrust of my question. So if you just
Yeah.
take it in that spirit, and any response,
Yeah.
that will help to
Yeah.
kind of frame it.
Okay, can I just go to my colleague Manna, because Manna might have been around at that time.
Absolutely.
She should be here, and she might just be able to give you a few
Sure.
headlines.
Manna, are you here?
Yeah. Yes, I am here. Apologies, I can't turn my camera on because the internet connection is very weak.
That's fine.
Yes, I mean, in terms of the struggles that we had, I'll just say, I think we were in a position where there wasn't a lot of partnership work going on, and that kind of hindered a lot of the just for us to work much more effectively with other organisations. And I think it was more so that perhaps organisations weren't really reaching out to us as an organisation. You know, we don't only offer the safe accommodation, i.e. refugees, we also have, you know, a very thriving legal team, etc. So it was just really about putting ourselves out there again and having women in the communities reaching out to us. I mean, we've always had a lot of self-referrals, but the maybe just that multi-agency working wasn't so much there. But I suppose reforms and also working with, I don't know if that's me.
Sorry, Roger, can you mute Councillor Mirza, please?
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So I think it's just about having other organisations working much more effectively with ourselves. And I think we've seen an improvement in that. And also just the work that we have going on with the commissioning services, i.e. Fiona's team, etc. It's a lot better. I think we have a lot more, a stronger working relationship. So yeah, I think things have, broadly speaking, have improved a lot for us.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Councillor Ali, you wanted to come in on this point.
Yeah, very quickly, Chair. I think Mana has already covered that, but all I wanted to say was it's fair to say that things have improved over the last 8 to 9 months, and that is part of our next procurement process as well, to make sure that we develop this partnership approach. And clearly, we were very successful in getting additional funding for expansion of the refuge, and that was in partnership with this group. So things have improved quite substantially, and I think they're being far more outward focused and in a partnership spirit, and looking at, you know, service performance, etc., which is pretty much in line with the commissioning intention that we have. So thank you, Chair.
No worries. Thank you very much, Councillor Ali. Does any other member have any questions? Okay, 3 in 1 go. So I'm going to go to Councillor Belgica Guana first, then I'm going to go to Councillor Riaz Mirza, and then to Councillor Garfield. Councillor Belgica Guana.
Okay. Has any new experience been gained in handling domestic abuse case during COVID-19?
Sorry, can you repeat that question again? Has any
new experience been gained in handling domestic abuse case during COVID-19?
I mean, what I would say is that we've all realized the value of social media, I suppose, to a certain extent, in that, you know, we've had to shift very, very quickly from face-to-face support into, you know, the social media arena. And, you know, from my perspective, it hasn't been as bad as we may have thought it was going to be. You know, as long as you've got your ICT support, and infrastructure, then, you know, we've seen that how beneficial that can be to service users, and to be able to continue to you know, support service users without seeing them in person. And from our perspective, I think a lot of the feedback, both inside the refugees themselves and through our community projects, many women have said they actually prefer to you know, to have the remote access support. And that's been because since COVID, obviously children have had long periods of at home until the government had made decisions around children going to school. And so that, you know, children being at home, still having to carry out your, you know, the family functions, as many women do, you know, it did put, you know, if they had to come out to services face to face, I'm not necessarily talking about the refuge now, but, you know, in terms of all of the services that we provide, legal advice, counselling, etc., that has taken the pressure off, and that they've got an alternative option. So certainly from our perspective, remote access has actually been a bit of success, and tools like Zoom, MS Teams, you know, the women have found it very, very useful. And we've gone and sought extra funding to develop our ICT resources in the refuges, so that we could have, you know, stable connections and things like that. And our service users have commented on how beneficial that has been to them in terms of being able to access, you know, and speak to their families, extended families, because, you know, through lockdown, you know, they've been very, very isolated. Some women reported being, you know, fairly depressed, etc. And so that for them has been a lifeline in terms of the Wi-Fi, and us, you know, seeking funding to put in this. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Meryl. Can someone just comment from Hesse, please? What have you learned during this COVID pandemic? Thank you.
So quite similar to what Meryl's just said, sort of one of the things that we've seen in a more positive way is that engagement in the service has improved quite significantly because of that remote access. And although we're a community-based service, and not being able to be based in the community may have presented as a challenge, we've actually been able to use that in a positive way and reach more people, especially with sort of our online training offer, reach more people and actually giving people more control. I think sometimes meeting in the community made people feel a little bit unsafe. So being able to speak with us over the phone in the comfort of their home where it's safe has been a great plus. One of the cons that we've seen is with our peer support group, where obviously that was a face-to-face group. They were meeting on a weekly basis. We did see a little bit of a dip in that engagement sort of in the earlier stages, in the earlier months of the lockdown. But recently we've sort of developed a more structured approach to the peer support group. And again, we've seen that has picked up again, and people are engaging and with that structure are able to actually benefit and move forward. So that's sort of some of our learning that we've picked up.
Thank you very much, Anna. Really appreciate that. Councillor Guana, is that enough for you? Are you happy with those responses?
Yes, Chair. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you for your question. Moving on, Councillor Mirza, can you ask a question, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the officers said earlier that you was awaiting something to do with the GLA, some information. My question is that normal? And how does it how long does it take to get the information? And if there were some instances where there was an emergency, you needed some information, are you providing that from them? Do you hear me?
I heard you. Who wants to take the question, please?
I think Councillor Garfield partly alluded to this. It's not unusual to not get information from the GLA until quite late on into something needing to be implemented. So we have to be quite swift on our feet. We will. So one of the things that Simon and the officer that he works with is that there is actually a kind of a London-wide meeting of commissioners and others that takes place regularly. So we're not the only ones who are baffled. Most of the London councils are baffled, I'm afraid, in terms of what's happening next. We can just keep pushing to find out the information. It won't be an emergency situation. That's part of the reason why we're saying that we want to carry on commissioning the refuge as though it's not going to happen, so that we don't have that loss of service. But it'll be, we might have to think quite quickly about how we cope with a transition or whatever else in terms of contracts and things like that. But hopefully it won't be something that the service needs to be kind of in an emergency situation about, because that's the last thing that they need. But no, this is not at all unusual.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Garfield.
On page 9 from MOPAC, there's a diagram. Let me just get the diagram up for myself. I've got my notes more than the. Here we go. Yeah, page 9. So page 13 of the pack, but page 9 of the report. The diagram shows figures in the borough and wider London on domestic abuse incidents and sexual offences and domestic sexual violence. I wanted to just know quickly from whomever is available or able to answer: are these figures highlighted per capita, or are they just total offences in those areas?
Chief Inspector.
Hi, so I've not actually seen that report that the council is referring to, but the numbers of domestic offences are created per monthly per borough. So they're not per capita, they're complete offences per borough. And then the incidence is all things relating to domestic abuse or domestic incidents that don't come with a criminal allegation with them. So there's two different figures.
Is because it's broken down by ward. You can't see that. I don't know why I'm
We can't see it, Councillor Garfield.
But it's broken down by ward, and my ward is very high. And I just wanted to know whether that's perhaps because of our increased population, or if these are adjusted per capita, and therefore there is a discrepancy whereby there is far more domestic violence in my ward than the rest of the borough.
Fiona.
So because Chief Inspector Casey can't see it. So this is drawn from the MOPAC crime dashboard, which is basically populated with figures from the police. And looking at the figures that we've given you are volume. I'm assuming your ward councillor is in Stratford. Matt might speak more to this, but I strongly suspect that some of that isn't necessarily about residents of Stratford. It's about Stratford as a place in terms of where offences actually take place, as opposed to where the residents are from. So, you know, you can draw your own conclusions about the nighttime economy and the busyness of the Stratford area, and that perhaps being why that's higher.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Councillor Garfield, are you happy with that?
Well, if it's possible, whether from yourself, Chief Inspector, or Alva, to have the figures adjusted per capita, just so we can understand whether that discrepancy can be attributed to the things that Fiona has told us, or whether there are less populated areas of the borough that we are as councillors. I'm not saying that the officers or professionals are doing this, but we as councillors are overlooking, because we can't see in the less busy areas where there might be spikes that can go unnoticed.
Chief Inspector or Alva Bailey, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, I can be there. So we can adjust some data for per capita, but as Fiona says, if you take Stratford as an example, all those crime types are not necessarily based on residency. They're where the person is geographically when they contact the police and when they're making allegations. If you think about the amount of transport footfall through that ward, and indeed people visiting our borough who are there become victims of crime and making an allegation, it's going to be significantly higher. They could live anywhere. But because they're making the allegation whilst they've got their feet on the ground in E15, those numbers are going to go against that particular ward on that data set.
Thank you very much. Councillor Garfield, are you happy with that?
I did have another question, if possible, though.
I'm going to have to come back to you. Okay, I've got a question for Councillor Ali. Councillor Tahora, I see you. I'll come to you after. Councillor Ali, one of the things that's been raised here today is about the move on for women and children. What are you as the cabinet member going to do about that, creating capacity? Because it seems to me that we're scoring a bit of an own goal here. Whilst we may be funding the capacity for London Black Women's Project to make sure they've got the beds that they need to service the clients that they need to service, if we could free up their space by moving people on once they've gone through the programme, that would be a win-win for everyone concerned. So can I find out what you're going to do about this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I think that's the point that was highlighted in the report as well, that, sooner we can actually move people on, better it would be in order to manage the capacity better. And that is an area that we work with the housing service and other partners to make sure that we have a collective approach across the board, across the council, to make sure that there is a smooth pathway which actually, runs through, so that, the least amount of time people spend in the refuge, it will be better. But at the same time, we need to make sure that they feel safe, are protected, and feel confident to move on as well. So there are, various strands to that elements as well, in terms of security as well, and then the accommodation. So that's something that we're looking across the board, Chair, and that's a very important point to bear in mind. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. You pretty much just repeated to me what the report said. I'm aware of what the report says. My question to you was, what are you going to do about it? We know what the issue is. The issue is that people are not being moved on quick enough. I think from what Meryl has said, the people that need to be moved on would have completed whatever program they need to complete. They would feel safe and secure. Then it's up to us to make sure we move them on in a timely manner. What are you going to do about it? I understand the issues that are in the report. We've seen that. But what are you actually going to do about it, say, tomorrow, moving forward, Councillor? Thank you.
Well, there is no such thing as tomorrow, Chair. I mean, these are the things we need to look at from strategic perspective. There are people who need to be moved on for whatever reason. Some of them may return to their families or not. Or some of them may have to be accommodated by the council. So that's an area that we need to work with the housing department, the HPAS team, and the other councils, the domestic violence areas, etc., with the police, to make sure that we move these people. It is important to move them, but it needs to be moved in a safe environment to make sure that we do not end up getting repeated offenses, etc. So it is an issue that we need to tackle clearly, but it needs to be an integrated approach through a proper strategy. But unfortunately, there's no easy answer that we will be able to move people tomorrow. It's the safety element of that, and making sure that the panel who actually look at each and every case feels safe. And the people are ready to move. I take your point.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. I'm just going to go back one more time, but I'm going to keep it very simple this time. Can I maybe suggest then maybe that some sort of strategy is created that can maybe address this issue going forward, so that we can have some sort of plan as to how we're going to address the issue? That's kind of what I was angling at, Councillor Ali. But thank you very much for your contributions. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you,
Councillor Tahora, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Daniel. I think you've even asked one part of my question already. That was, about how to move them on and how long does it take to move them on, and also, regarding capacity, and also, is there any other strategy in terms of mediation, in terms of maybe supporting the other members of the family as well? If it's a woman and children, do we also support the perpetrator, maybe the man that's causing it? Are we giving support? Because we mustn't also ignore the person that's causing the offense. So is there this kind of strategy that you're using as well?
Thank you very much, Councillor Tahora. Who would like to go and answer that? Anybody? Don't all rush at once, people.
Could I ask Meryl or Mana to answer the question about the difficulties they have in moving people on? And then I'm happy to come back and talk about some of the family work and perpetrators.
Sure, that's fine. Meryl, if I just ask you to keep your answer brief, because also we have covered that already, but if you could just keep it.
Yeah, I'm going to go to Mana. I'm sorry. I'm going to go to Mana.
No worries. Hello, Mana.
Hello, thank you. Yes, just to answer your question, I'll try to be as brief as I can. I think the struggle is obviously with housing and having that kind of partnership set up with Newham Housing Department. So we've tried to contact them many times and raise our concerns. Unfortunately, we haven't really gotten anywhere. So I think from what you were saying, Chair, if we can have an actual strategy in place, because I know the neighbouring boroughs, Tower Hamlets and Hackney, I believe they have a strategy in place with their safe accommodation, as in refugees and local authority, to successfully move women on. I appreciate what Councillor Ali was saying in terms of it is important to move women on, but to make sure that they're moved on safely. We do strongly believe that actually by having a strategic element there in terms of having that partnership working with housing is the most safest way to move women on, particularly single women, again, because they don't really they don't get that support from housing. They can get housing benefit. I don't want to go into too much detail, but they don't have that. So again, it will be, private renting, etc. And again, that's not probably the most safest way for women to move on, based on we don't know what type of tenure they're going to get into. So it's, they can fall into that cusp of abuse again. So broadly speaking, from our end, you know, we always ensure that the women, families particularly, have the elements of support from the mothers, children, etc. So there is that holistic support. We have to ensure that they are ready to move on, whether that's immigration, whether they're safe within themselves. So that's the type of work that we do. We would like it to be like 6 to 9 months, but unfortunately, because of housing situation, that can take longer, particularly since COVID has hit us. We've had to put kind of move-ons. It was brought to a halt because it wasn't deemed to be safe for women to be moving into.
1 minute, 1 minute.
Okay, it wasn't very safe for women to be moving on to hostels, etc. So, you know, it is a thing that we are continuously looking at. But I do strongly believe that we need to take a bit more of a strategic approach on this one.
Thank you so much, Mana, for your contribution. Before we go to Fiona, Roger, can I ask you to note an action point? Mana, if you wouldn't mind, could you please just email Roger some of the action points you feel that could go into the strategic plan so that we can feed these into our recommendations to Councillor Ali going forward? And Meryl, if you could do the same as well outside the meeting, anything you think is pertinent to this point, if you could just email it to Roger, and we'd be more than happy to include that in our recommendations.
Thank you.
Tamara, I'll let you come in very quickly before Fiona, if it's really burning.
It's just very quick. I think it's also just important to note from our perspective as well that you know, not women moving on from the refuges, but actually women in the community in Newham who need to move on to refuges or who don't want to go into refuges outside of the borough, and that they are also getting the support that they need with you know, from Newham, from housing. So perhaps looking at a wider strategy, not just about refuge move on, but also more generally how we support people to move via a sort of Newham stream, so Newham housing and what they're doing, because it's also people who are unsafe in Newham and moving them out, which is where we see our issues as well.
Tamara, can I ask you a quick question? Just a follow on from that. Are you aware of any sort of protocol in place at the moment that the council has to do this? You know, to like what happens? You know, a lady or a family leave a refuge, or they need to move on. What do you guys actually do? Do you pick up the phone and call a counterpart? Do you send an email? Is there a process at the moment? What happens?
I'll pass this quickly to Shana just because she does it all of the time with Newham.
Okay, very quickly, Shana, I'll give you 1 minute and then we're going to Fiona. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess essentially we support people to approach housing, complete housing applications. Again, some of the issues that Mana has mentioned about, especially single applicants, not really getting the support. I mean, that is a real stumbling block for us. And often we're supporting single people who are fleeing familial abuse or, you know, they've got the perpetrator, ex-partner. So that is also a big stumbling block for us. We are sort of constantly via email sort of pushing and you know, looking at the legislation and going back to line managers, and actually recently started a conversation with the new head of HPAS, which seems very positive, but you know, sadly things can't change as quick as we need them to. But you know, that's sort of how we are trying to manage that at the moment. We are always doing refuge searches, but I'm sure Meryl and Mana will tell you that it's gold dust. You know, it's few and far between, especially for single spaces. And as well as, you know, we're moving sometimes families away from their support networks. That's a very, very difficult choice for some people to make. You know, children, schooling, doctors' surgeries, all the rest of it that comes with it. So, you know, absolutely, there's always challenges when it comes to housing. And yeah, that's sort of our experience with Newham housing at this minute.
Thank you very much for that, Shana. Fiona, if you feel you have something to add to it, then do, you know, come in. If you feel that it's all been said, then.
Well, I will say, Chair, in answer to the question is on page 26 of your report, there is a couple of paragraphs on LBN children and young people, which talks about the New Day project, which does have as part of it a project called Caring Dads, which is around working, particularly with the men and families around their domestic abuse. And also currently we are doing some work with our public health team, looking at the evidence base to try to make a business case around the perpetrator programme.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ali, I'll let you come in very quickly.
I'll be very quick, Chair. I think with respect to the question about the moving on and providing adequate accommodation, as you know, Chair, that the Council's housing allocation policy is currently under review. So I think it'd be perfectly reasonable for the Scrutiny Commissioner to actually add a recommendation in there that we ought to give some sort of consideration or priority as part of the review of the allocation policy in such cases. So it's an entirely matter for you, but I thought it'd be worth saying it.
Thank you for your self-evident recommendation, Councillor Ali. We really do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
We all part of the same team.
Any member have a question? I'm going to be coming down to the last questions now. Councillor Garfield. Councillor Garfield, I can't hear you. I don't think I'm the only one. Sorry, we can't hear you.
No.
No, we still can't hear you.
No.
Okay, I'm going to have to come back to you unless you can fix this quite sharpish. No? Councillor Garfield? No, we can't hear you. Does any other member have a question?
Oh, no.
No?
No.
Okay, one of the things that I wanted to say was thank you very much to London Black Women's Project for coming along. We really do appreciate it. One of the things that was mentioned was about status and no recourse to public funds. Are you there, Meryl? Can you?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
you
here.
are. Okay, brilliant. If the council was to cut its funding in this area, how would that affect your service, if it would affect it at all?
Say that again. If
so, we talked about no recourse to public funds. I think that's something that you cater for, is it?
Yeah,
Correct?
yeah.
What I was asking is if the council were to cut any funding in this area, would that affect your service or would that not affect you in any way?
Oh, well, it would affect our service because I think at the moment, I'd have to go back to our accounts. I think we're funding quite a few, well, not a lot, but women who come under that category. Can you hear me still?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So, but I'd have to come back to you with kind of the percentages and figures and stuff like that, to be honest. I'll have to get back to that.
No
but
problem.
it would have an impact. I mean, yeah, it's going to have an impact, particularly on those group of women who are highly vulnerable, likely to be exploited in all sorts of areas, and who also come from the BAME community. And we already know a lot of the research that's coming out about the BAME community and vulnerabilities around health and all that other stuff. So, but I'll come back to you. I'll make a note.
Thank you very much. Roger, can you follow that up as well, please? Thank you. Councillor Garfield, do you want to give it another go?
Is it working now?
Yoo-hoo, we have you. Loud and clear.
No, I've no idea what happened. Okay, so apologies if I've already missed this piece of information or written the report and I've just not been able to find it, but I wanted to know if we had or could get a breakdown of where referrals are coming from at the minute and if there's been a change during the pandemic. I currently work in children's services and I know there was a spike in September for safeguarding referrals because children weren't in school, and that spiked when they came back to school because that's where most of those referrals come from. And I wondered if there was similar stats, figures, or information you could give us.
Okay, Councillor Ali, did you indicate you wanted to answer that? Oh, no, you just unmuted yourself. Okay, sorry, who wants to answer that question?
I can share. Again, apologies for the size of it. There's a lot of data within there, but on I think page 10 of the report, Councillor Garfield, we've been basically doing until recently a weekly kind of update of the numbers, and then I think it's kind of triangulating the data with the information that's on page 4 in terms of where the referral sources are for Hestia as well. I don't think it's included in there, but hopefully from LBWP we could get an idea of where their referrals are coming from as well. So if you need more data than that, we can certainly supplement it.
It would be definitely good to get information on where they're coming from LBN too, if possible. Thank you, Fiona.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up this item, but before I do so, I'm going to allow our external witnesses 1 minute. So that's Meryl and also the Hestia team. If you've got one piece of advice that you would give to this Scrutiny Commission in regards to what the council could do better to help you, I would probably say outside of the move on process, because I think we've highlighted that. What would it be? And I'll go to Meryl first, and then I'll go to Hestia. Meryl.
I think what we encounter are women with, sometimes who have, alternative languages and so forth. And we're fortunate that we can cover some of those languages, but that can be an issue, and especially when they're having to deal with different types of services. We're very fortunate we're in a position that our staff are quite skilled in that area, to assist them with kind of wider form filling and stuff like that, and that is also part of their role in terms of casework. But I think sometimes the agencies themselves, through lack of resources, etc., the women feel an indirect pressure around not having English as a first language. That's one of the things I would say. I don't know in terms of Manna. Is she still there?
Yeah, no, I'm still here. Yes, I would agree to that. Just having more resources available in different languages. And also, I think it's, it sounds a bit cliche, but it's okay to come and ask us, what is actually going on in terms of when we're talking about DSV from yourselves. So it's just something that we don't have to wait for quarterly or monthly meetings. When we start seeing that there's little patterns of things, that can we actually just nip it up the bud on a strategic level, and just have those communications. I think that would massively help. And I know the chair said that we shouldn't be speaking about move-ons, but that's something that's been building up. And obviously I've heard from colleagues in Hestia that it's not just something that's impacting us, but them equally as well. So I think maybe just having those conversations just to see what is actually happening in the borough. Data's wonderful, but maybe it doesn't really give the real picture as to what's going on. I hope that makes sense.
It made a lot of sense, Manna. Thank you so much for your contribution.
Can I just add something? I mean, we have a legal and advice team who are specialists in, working with women with no recourse to public funds, as external cases, and they often so these women are in the community, but they often need to get into a refuge, and I know we've already talked about that already, and I don't know what's going to happen around immigration. It is something that we're taking up on a wider scale in terms of the domestic abuse bill and how they've been left out of that. To a certain extent, but that is another issue. We want to be able to provide an equal service, based on people's human rights. They haven't created the situations that they're in. They're the victims of the situations, but they're also the victims of, government policies and stuff like that. And I'm not saying necessarily that Newham as a borough has the solution to that, but it is something that I think, again, strategically, it is something that Newham could raise with government, based on their political positions, and also think about in terms of a strategy, how are we going to create this equality for this group of women who are highly vulnerable.
Thank you very much, Meryl. I really do appreciate it, as does the whole committee. Tamara, I'll give you a minute if you've got anything you want to add. If not, I will be wrapping up. Tamara.
Yeah, I'll just say very briefly, perhaps I agree completely with what Meryl said and Manna have said, but in addition to that, what Newham can do, I think it's just about keeping domestic abuse at the forefront of everyone's minds when they're considering other matters. So obviously we're talking about it in this context, but actually from a health context, from housing, from business, from the way in which, community redevelopment, every different aspect, think about domestic abuse in that context as well. Think about it in terms of, as LBN as an employer, as in the workplaces that are based here, what are they doing around domestic abuse? It impacts such a significant proportion of the population at any one time. It's everyone's business at all times. And so it's just to keep that. So it's not just when we're talking about crime, or it's not just when we're talking about violence against women and girls, but actually running sort of throughout every aspect of council business. And that's when we'll truly see a kind of a coordinated community response, and actually see some really good results and outcomes for the, for the residents of Newham, certainly, and other people who, who work in the borough as well.
Thank you very much, Tamara. On behalf of the committee, I would just like to say a massive thank you to Tamara, to Meryl, to everybody who's come along as a witness. Please do feel free to stay, but obviously if you do have other things to attend to, we do not mind if you leave, because the item is now concluded. So thank you very much once again from the committee. Moving on to item number 6, which is reporting crime and antisocial behaviour. For this item, we have Councillor James Beckles, we have Alva Bailey, and we have Chief Inspector Matt Casey. I'll give you 2 minutes each for opening remarks, and then we'll get into the questions. Councillor Beckles, you go first. Thank you.
I have nothing really to add other than the information before you is a clear definition of what we set out in terms of reporting ASB, crime, noise nuisance, fly tipping, and everything else that we've received via Delta One. And the presentation is a clear indication of where we're going and our direction of travel and where we've been as a service. So I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Beckles. Moving on, Alva Bailey. Do you have anything you want to add?
Thank you, Councillor. Nothing more.
Alva, you're really low. I can hear you, but it's like.
Sorry, I need to bring my microphone
Yeah,
down.
that's better. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yes, just saying really nothing more. I'm available to answer questions based on the report that I've drafted there.
Thank you very much, Alva. Chief Inspector Matt Casey, do you have anything you want to add?
No, nothing by exception, Chair. There's some crime challenges and some areas of success, I would say, for Newham over the last few months, but nothing particular to add, unless, of course, I get the opportunity to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Does any member have any questions at this point? Okay, I'll kick it off. My question is about 3.6 in the report. I'll give everybody a second to get there. 3.6. And I'm looking at the section. I'll read some of it. Okay, we'll start from when. Is everybody there? 3.6? Okay. So when the contact centre closes at 5 p.m, it says, with the exception of noise calls, we receive very few calls from the public regarding crime and ASB. My question is if you are receiving those calls at that time, why did we make the decision to cut the service over that time in the evening? Alva or James, thank you.
Regarding the time, I can say, Chair, that the further in the paper and elsewhere in the presentation, the points around the types of calls has been highlighted. Primarily, the calls are domestic noise. They're not called to which the council can necessarily provide significant impact on. As I mentioned in a previous committee meeting, the calls are generally domestic noise, and officers quite often when they get to those locations have been told the noise has stopped, the nuisance has moved on, and even when we choose not to visit but we call instead to check whether the noise is still occurring, people say no, the noise has stopped. So even though we get the calls and the numbers are there, the nature of the calls are quite often very minimal, and the frequency, the duration, and so forth is very short. And so whilst it might constitute some nuisance, it wouldn't necessarily be antisocial behaviour.
Thank you very much, Alva. Councillor Beckles, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Nothing further to add, Chair. I think we've alluded to that, and we've made it clear in the last meeting last month. We did say that the data and the information that we had didn't always lead to what we call a statutory noise nuisance. And there are other remedies to what residents may be feeling, such as housing, private rented sector. And in the report, I think it's 3.8, we have set out the types of calls that we are receiving.
Thank you very much. One thing I would ask you, Alva, is during this time of COVID, if I was to have a house party with, say, 20 guests, of course, the police would come and deal with it because I'd be breaking some form of COVID legislation. However, post-COVID, when we go back to normal, fingers crossed it will happen one day, the police generally have other crimes to deal with, and a noisy house party is not necessarily top of their agenda. So for our residents, the question is, who is coming to their aid at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, when the neighbour across the road will not just stop and the noise is persistent? Who is going to come to their rescue? And the other point to my question is about deterrent factor. If everybody in Newham now knows that you can make as much noise as you like and nobody's coming till the next day, what is to stop these figures from climbing? And do you anticipate a rise in this sort of nuisance? Thank you.
I wouldn't anticipate a rise, and I hope there isn't a rise. ultimately, the police is there. The police also have a responsibility for antisocial behaviour. I accept the point around resources and priorities. One of the issues for council officers after hours particularly is their safety. They don't have the same level of protection or resource as police officers do. With the reduction in funding, partly because of the changes in the way MOPAC has priced the police officers that the council contracts. With that reduction, officers now are only able to work until 11. Anytime after that, our officers will be left unsupported because they will equally be relying on borough police to support them. We haven't got that special treatment, if you like, outside of our contracted officers. So we couldn't otherwise expect borough police to support us to attend some of these places where we put council officers at risk. So that's also part of the consideration in terms of how long we're able to offer the service. And that's why currently the service operates until 9:30. But once we complete the restructure and say around the start of December, we'll be working to 11 to in line with the police officers that we contract.
Thank you very much, Alva. I do appreciate that. I do have a supplementary which I'm going to go into because it follows this thread, and then I'll open up to other members. One of the things you said is you said that this is a matter for the police. Is that correct?
Well, not solely, not only, but also what I'm saying, ASB is also a matter for the police. So sorry, it's reasonable for residents to call the police if they think there's antisocial behaviour.
Thank you, Alva. I was pretty much just looking for a yes or no, but I do appreciate that. It was only because you'd already mentioned it. I just want to bring everybody's attention to 4.8 of this report, which clearly sets something out, and I'll read it if everybody's there. It says the provisions of the Environmental Protection Act 1990 require local authorities to investigate nuisance complaints as far as is reasonably practicable. Now, it doesn't say police, it says local authorities. And I assume that's for a reason because it sits within our ballpark. And I just think there's a bit of, pushing it over to the other side to say, okay, look, we're not going to deal with it. We'll let the police. And that's one of the things that I will say in terms of also the police being able to support our officers. Did we or did we not make a choice to cut the number of police? I think we had 40 at one point. We're now down to, is it 16, Alva? Correct me if I'm wrong. So, yeah. So we made the conditions, which then meant it was unsafe for our officers to go out after 11. Do you see where I'm going with this? So I think, sorry?
Oh, sorry, I was waiting for you to finish, Chair.
Yeah, so I think, looking at it all in the round, I understand what you're saying about the officers can't go out after 11 without police protection. I think that's what you're trying to allude to. However, we made the conditions that meant that there were no police officers available for them to go out with after 11, which I think is a bit of a shame. Does any member have any question at this point?
Sorry, Chair, I think I need to slightly correct you on that. I don't believe we made any conditions. If you look at the round and the budgeting session, £45 million worth of cuts up until 2022, only £10 million worth of growth. Continuing the contract on its current fund would have been £2 million. Out of that, there were other priorities to look at. So if you look at growth funds and everything else, of course, did we create the conditions? No. Are we faced with circumstances in terms of budgeting cuts? Yes. Do we have to prioritize what we do for residents? Yes. Are we facing challenging times? We are. We're looking at COVID now. There's £20 million worth of savings that need to be made. And I think we ask our residents, what are your priorities? Do you wish to have safety? Do you want to have a team that will go out, that will have your back and that will protect you? Yes. Are we restructuring the team to do that? Of course. But have we created those conditions of the financial circumstances that we find ourselves in? No. If you look at other local authorities, they're having to make the similar challenges to us. I can't speak for them. I can only speak for Newham. I can only speak of the financial priorities and the financial implications that we face by continuing such a large contract while we are facing desperate residents and looking at where we can reallocate those funds. And again, I would say, did we create those conditions? No.
Thank you very much, Councillor Beckles. I do appreciate your intervention. Councillor Garfield, I'm going to come to you in a minute. Just one thing I will say is that in terms of the budget area, Councillor Beckles, if we decide to cut one area versus another, that's a political choice that somebody has made. And I think to say that that's not a choice, I think it's a bit disingenuous. I agree with you in terms of the financial position that the council finds itself in. We all know times are very, very hard. However, somebody somewhere made the decision that this service was going to face the chop. In terms of the conditions that have been created, if you listen to what I said, what I was actually saying is that by us actually cutting the number of police, it now means that our officers are unable to go out past 11 with police support. I wasn't talking about the overall financial position the council finds itself in. We all know what's to blame there. So I think you've kind of maybe misconstrued what I've said. I wasn't talking about creating the conditions financially. No one's talking about financial mismanagement. That's not where I was going with this. What I'm saying is, bluntly, is that we have created the conditions for our officers to not be able to fulfill this service safely, as Alva said, because we no longer have the police available. And that was a political choice that we made. Someone somewhere decided that this was more important than that. And that's absolutely fine. That's what politics is about. But somebody made that decision.
Chair, if I may.
Alva?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's also worth making the point that the agreement with MOPAC and the MPS around police changed. We used to have a buy one, get one free arrangement. That entirely went out the window, and the cost per officer had increased significantly or considerably. So even with the same budget that we had, we no longer could even afford half of the officers we have with the same budget, because the buy one, get one free deal had ended, and officer price costs went up. So even with the same budget, and in fact, the cost for this team currently is not a great deal less than the cost for the 40 officers. We're talking hundreds rather than thousands.
Thank you, Alva, and I really do appreciate your contribution. And I think once again, you do highlight the point I was making, is that somebody somewhere made a choice. Yes, I agree with you. The money is different. However, somebody made a choice that we're going to go a bit further. I'm going to move on now, because I don't want to get stuck in a rut. Councillor Garfield.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know whether we measure noise pollution based on noise complaints in decibels or nature of noise.
To evidence statutory noise nuisance, we use a noise measuring device. So that would be placed in the home of the complainant, and that would measure the noise that they're complaining of about. I don't know the precise decibel level that I would have to ask operating officers to give me that detail, but there is a level beyond which it becomes statutory noise nuisance. So in relation to that definition, yes, we use a measuring device. Officers also use their judgment. Obviously, if you turn up and there's a party in full swing and it's very loud, you don't necessarily need a device to determine that that's beyond the threshold. So officers do make their professional judgment.
What if there's a situation where the noise is beyond the decibel threshold, but the noise is caused by crying children, or the sound of families playing, or the sound of a loud washing machine? There are, I frequently hear complaints of noise from residents whereby the noise may be loud, but it's not clear whether there is much that a family can do to limit that level of noise, particularly if the places in which they live are built with very thin walls. So what's the procedure then?
Generally, we and increasingly, we're directing the team to take 3 key points into consideration. We talk about persistence, intent, and impact. So that's the kind of reasonable person's view. In some cases, as you described, there are other structural issues around converted accommodation, for example, where there are insulation issues. In those cases, we will encourage complainants to use approaches like mediation to raise the complaint in a neighborly fashion, if you like. We'll even encourage our housing provider or landlords to get involved in that. I don't think the intent of the legislation is that people are criminalized for some of these issues, and so our approach is to solve these problems. So mediation and negotiation is the way we are approaching the work, and what the team is now increasingly being encouraged to do is to seek those resolutions rather than we can't do anything unless we can enforce something. So the enforcement only approach has shifted, and increasingly we're engaging landlords, we're engaging neighbours and residents to resolve these issues among themselves.
Thank you. Councillor Garfield, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yes, I do, Chair. It's really helpful, Alva, I appreciate it, thank you. I wanted to know then actually, Chair, whether we as a scrutiny committee could note these comments in the fact that we monitor and investigate noise complaints. Although based on sound, we don't intend to criminalize noise that is not intentionally nuisanced.
Ultimately, there is a sanction, and the report lists a number of sanctions that can be applied in a graduated fashion, starting with warnings and more formal approaches. Obviously, there's a point where noise becomes antisocial. And again, it's about persistence, it's about the intent, and it's about the impact. If a child is running along a corridor, of course, there's not necessarily an intention to cause antisocial behavior. It perhaps isn't, it's a one-off, it's not often enough. But if the impact is significant, regardless of the intent and regardless of the persistence, we will then approach that with the same approach. We'll engage the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator. We'll make them aware of the impact of their behavior, and we'll encourage and advise them about means they can take to resolve that. Of course, if they don't seek to resolve that, then the intent, we start to go down the line. Well, you are aware of the impact of this, and if you continue to do that, then there's a certain kind of intention there and persistence, and then we will approach it using all the different tools and powers that we have to seek a resolution. Of course, if people refuse to seek early resolution to these issues, then we will apply all the tools and powers that the legal tools and powers that we have available. And that I think it would be. Yeah, sorry,
Alva, I think it would be useful, because I like what you said there, but for us to publish that information to our residents so that it's clear that when it comes to noise pollution and noise nuisance, we are looking at the intent, the impact, and the level, so that it's very, very clear to residents exactly what's expected of them and exactly when they can make a complaint to that effect regarding their neighbours.
Yes, Chair, I appreciate that, and I think I agree that's something we need to do. We've updated some of the information so far on our web pages, but we perhaps need to do some more work, and we are aware that we need to do some more communication with residents about the changes and some of the behaviours that we expect as well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Guana, do you have a question?
Yes, I got the numbers in the report. They say in the page 32, where they say from January to October, we have the 13,000 noise complaints, and also for the antisocial behavior, we have from the same period 3,000. And I was doing a mathematical thing, so like dividing for 10 months and divide for day. It's like 11 cases a day, and for the noise is 46 a day and 11 for antisocial behavior. But we have a small team, and they say they will receive, I think they did all the process, and it's a quite large number you can make a day. I don't know if or maybe in which way you are doing, depends the level of the complaint. I want to know, because it's a large number for me to sort out every day. Thank you.
Absolutely, the numbers for that period are significantly high. I think we have to put in context the increased numbers we have during the lockdown. There were significantly more calls to the council complaining about noise, garden parties, particularly during the first lockdown when the restrictions were being breached. Regularly, residents reported them to us. Of course, we have no powers to enter residents' home. We have no enforcement powers under the COVID regulations. And so we refer these matters to the police. And of course, the police have to deal with those with their competing resources. Generally, however, we wouldn't have that many noise over that period. And in any case, as I previously indicated, a lot of these noise were complaints, not necessarily complaints about noise happening now. Some of them were reports of noise in the past. So they still count as noise reports, but not all of them are urgent noise or noise happening at the time of the report. It could be reports of noise at some of the time that will go into a kind of investigation process rather than a response, an immediate response.
Thank you very much. Councillor Guan, are you happy with that?
The last things. Okay. What I don't know how work that because it's the staff is few people, and how many people is doing the admin? Only the admin, because it's a large number. Part of the people that are going for every call. Thank you. Or if they have increased any number of the staff to taking these complaints.
Alva, if you'd answer that quite succinctly, thank you.
Yes, just to say that part of the service is divided, so it's not part of the antisocial behaviour team. There's a separate part of the council that answers the call, and there are different officers that put the calls on the system, at which point it gets to the officers who will investigate and follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mirza, I'm going to come to you in a minute. I'm just mindful that item 6 and item 7, we're kind of straddling across both of them. It's kind of mishmashing into one. So I'm formally going to move to item number 7, the enforcement team, but I don't think that'll actually change anything because essentially the questions are on that anyway. If everybody's agreeable to that, yeah? Great, fantastic. Okay, so moving on to item number 7, enforcement team. Councillor Mirza, ask your question, please.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, what I want to know is that if there is a complaint, is there any data where we know who these complaints are? Are they about the council tenant? Because if they're a council tenant, that'll be breach of a tenancy agreement. So that is much easier to follow it up and deal with it than the private the resident. Is that right?
Thank you, Councillor Mirza. Thank you. I think they understand the question. Thank you. Alva or James?
Yes, our officers can tell either then or later through investigation whether the tenant is a council tenant. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy to resolve the issue. Where there's a tenancy breach, officers have to take that into consideration, and it will still be an escalated process. But there are lots of vulnerabilities sometimes that we have to consider. Families sometimes have children, and quite often the perpetrator or the cause of the antisocial behavior isn't necessarily the tenancy holder. It could be a child, it could be someone else living in the home, or the home could be occupied by a vulnerable person. We also are very aware of the added consequences of making our residents homeless. So as a council, we have to factor all of these things. So using housing sanction is not necessarily the first point of resolution, but it can be ultimately. But quite often other avenues will be pursued.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mirza, are you happy with that?
Thank you, Chair. I think if what I want to get at is if they're a council tenant and they could be spoken to, probably that will deal with it, because if they're reminded of their tenancy obligation, that becomes much easier than somebody, in the private sector.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Alva, James, just very quickly, I want to bring you to the noise nuisance performance data between April 2019 and April 2020. And obviously earlier on, Alva, you were speaking about, some of the noises, like what Councillor Garfield was saying, being, children crying, all that sort of stuff. I think it would have been quite helpful for people/music to have a bit more detail so that we can see exactly what we're dealing with, because to a layman like myself, that's raging house parties going on till 3 in the morning. It probably is not that, but you see where I'm going with this, because we haven't got sufficient detail. It's quite hard for us to distinguish between one or the other. Barking dogs, building works, domestic, one would assume, is what you were talking about there, Alva, in regards to, are you talking about domestic rows, or are you talking about just domestic noise, such as children playing, etc.?
It could be children playing, television, slamming doors, creaking doors, washing machine, that kind of stuff.
Okay, that's fine. So that makes sense then. So 875 makes sense on that. So people/music at 7,625, which is the massive figure on that page. If domestic is washing machines, children crying, etc., what could people/music be, please, Alva?
Some of those would be domestic noise, in terms of people playing amplified music fairly loudly. Some could be garden parties. Some could be groups in a communal space or outside a communal space congregating. So it could be a report of a group of people by any description hanging around outside my my flat, my block, and so forth. So unfortunately, the system isn't very sophisticated yet still.
That's fine.
So we can't break down.
That's fine. I appreciate your answer. So we clear then, it could be either people outside a block making noise, which one would assume would need a noise officer to attend because that's quite annoying. It could be Robbie at number 30 playing his drum and bass all to himself. But still, one would assume we need a noise officer to attend. Or it could be a garden party, as you alluded to, in which case we would still need a noise officer to attend. So from where I'm coming from, you can see my issue is that we cut back on a service, quite frankly, that it seems to me there is a healthy demand for. And I just don't quite understand why we would do that. It seems counterintuitive to me to make the decision that has been made when the figures are borne out the way they are.
Yes. If you forgive me for perhaps repeating just a little bit of this, sorry, Councillor Beckles, before you come in.
Go ahead.
Just to say, some of these reports are not necessarily about noise happening now. So some of these will be complaints about events. So the figures on their own, perhaps, to some extent, talk about numbers rather than describe the events that generate those numbers. And I would probably suggest that a lot of that noise happens after 11, after midnight, or some of that noise at least happen after midnight. And the issues around officer safety, officer availability is not around at that time. But then again, I can't be sure when these noise happen in detail.
Thank you very much, Alva. I think you kind of addressed it. I think Councillor Beckles wanted to jump in on that.
Only to talk about officer safety.
Officer safety. Are we going back to the post 11 PM?
No, just what Alva said.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your contribution. I'm going to go to Councillor Garfield and then I'm going to go to Councillor Masters.
Innocuous question. If we can issue fines on the back of noise complaints, then why can't this service be revenue positive?
Great question.
I think in reality, a lot of these are not kind of instant fine procedure. We can't just rock up to a noisy group or a party and issue them with a fine. We haven't got those powers, I'm afraid. And so fines for noise follow a process. And in most cases, that process wouldn't apply. It would be more, again, persistent noise, more likely to be noise from commercial premises, and noise where we've witnessed statutory nuisance, and those are far fewer than you would think. As you can see, despite in that same slide number 11 that the chair just referred to, The last bullet point on that slide says, despite over 11,000 complaints between April 2019 and April 2020, we only were able to witness 20 statutory noise nuisance. So the number of those noise that could actually result in a fine are very low. So there's an issue there about the efficiency if our pursuit is about issuing fines. And so another approach is absolutely necessary.
Councillor Garfield, I can't really hear you.
Hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, I'm not sure what keeps happening to my system tonight. I do apologise. So on the back of that, Alva, thank you for that information. This is a follow-up question that's political in nature, so therefore more likely to be for Councillor Beckles. Should we, as a local authority or as a political group, be campaigning for the government to give us more enforcement powers to fine people for noise nuisance? Because we need to look at the bigger picture of how to solve this, really.
I would say yes. But what I would also say is there's a bit of nuance, and for some of newer councillors who might not remember that we used to have a 3 strikes rule in Newham brought in by the previous mayor, where it was slightly harder, it was slightly tougher. And I'm sure there is such like lurch for us to be more punitive in our residents. Are we trying to find new ways of resolving issues? Yes. Do we need slightly more punitive measures for those residents who breach our regulations and laws? Yes, we do. Sometimes our approaches can be slightly more difficult. And I think if Scrutiny would like to help us along these things, perhaps a recommendation for us to take different measures to campaign for or with the government or against the government for more powers, and for us to look at our different approaches. Are they working currently? We don't know. We're trying something new. But of course, you need a carrot and you need a stick, and you do need sometimes a punitive recourse to certain actions when residents are stepping out of line and are breaching the tenancy agreements. The consequence of that is you potentially might make some residents homeless. And that's a political decision that sometimes the cost can be too much and the risk can be too high. So I think it has to be balanced.
Thank you, Councillor Beckles. Councillor Garfield, literally 30 seconds, as Councillor Masters has been waiting.
Last one, I'm terribly sorry. Thank you for waiting, Councillor Masters. There is one type of noise complaint I don't see here, which is the sound of very loud motorists late at night in leased sports cars. What can we do about that? How can we add it onto this? I can see the chair's expression, but I'm afraid it is a complaint that I frequently get, and it's a noise I frequently hear. And because they're not fixated to and address when the noise happens, we currently have no way of monitoring it. And I think if we had those devices that Alva talked about that measure decibel levels affixed to speed cameras or the like, we might be able to make some sort of progress. But are we making any progress at all on that?
Alva, before you answer that, I do apologise for my facial expressions, Councillor Garfield. It was more to the fact I thought, what a niche subject, you know, like in terms of broad brushstrokes, we generally look at the broad overarching themes, and obviously you've gone on to quite a niche thing. So I do apologise if my facial expression was one of a quizzical look.
That's okay,
Alva.
Chair. I take no offence. It's niche, but in terms of the broad brushstroke, a noise that cannot be attributed to a fixed abode
absolutely.
at the time when it happens is something that I think we could look at as a broad brushstroke.
Absolutely. Alva?
Chair, if the our police colleague Matt doesn't mind, I would invite Matt to come in on that one, because that one is so niche. I think it's beyond the council, really. We need to be fixing these digital devices onto speed cameras and all of that. I'm not quite sure that's within our gift.
Due respect to Matt.
Yeah, thanks. And you're right. So that one is fairly and squarely in the police domain. All that use of motor vehicles for antisocial behaviour, all these sort of boy racer gatherings that we've seen in Beckton and other places, that is definitely in the police domain. And there's specific legislation for it, Section 59 of the Police Reform Act, where we can seize vehicles, issue fines, take punitive measures for vehicles that are being used in an antisocial fashion. And obviously noise is a big part of that. But like many other things, that's around a crime in motion, and it's about getting a police response that's speedy and able to take measures. But we've had success before, you know, for Beckton's the one that springs to mind, but the powers are so far ranging in terms of the police that I think that's definitely one that we need to be informed of and respond to in a very swift manner, and then take some decisive action when we're there.
Thank you very much for that answer, Councillor Garfield. I'm sure that answers it sufficiently for you. Councillor Masters.
I was going to kind of jump away from noise, although I'm really glad this issue has come back, because I think I raised it at the last meeting, this sort of quandary this puts us in, that if enforcement won't go out overnight and the police don't have the resources to cover, then how the heck do you actually manage to sort of prove any of this? So that's what I'll just put on the table. I wanted to actually switch attention over to the Greenway. So would anyone else like to wrap up noise, or can I jump onto the Greenway?
Councillor Masters, you are by all means probably going to be the last person to ask a question this evening. So go for it.
I'm just hearing that there are more problems with gangs on the Greenway and of female runners being harassed. And I'm just wondering how this is being addressed, bearing in mind the lack of resources that we're all aware of and the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, it's, you know, a truly appalling state of affairs that Newham residents are having to sort of deal with this on top of everything else. Is there anything you can do to allay the fears being voiced on social media at the moment about this issue?
Chief Inspector Matt, I think that's for you. It's not really a council issue. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, that's a great question. So the short answer is that there is a task force. I think it's of 5 separate safer neighbourhood teams that have all got a joint interest in various policing challenges on the Greenway, obviously because it stretches through so many different wards. And robbery, ASB, and a couple of not many, but a couple of sexual offences have been reported there in the last couple of months. So the collective nature of it, it's tasked via our local TTCG meeting, which the local authority have a seat at the table. So I think what's best, if I get somebody perhaps to give you the tactical plan for the Greenway for the next, it works on a 4-week cycle. Perhaps, Chair, I can send it by yourself for dissemination rather than me trying to explain what the tactics and their results are. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, absolutely. That's perfectly fine. And can I also ask maybe if you could get that information, and the next time we see you, I'll be more than happy to give you 5 minutes to go through that with the committee. I think that's quite an important thing.
Great. Yeah, there's definitely a plan for the Greenway. So yes, a perennial challenge, unfortunately, that particular patch of land.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Councillor Master, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that, or any other question?
No, I just think residents would really appreciate seeing a plan. So, you know, it'd be great to be able to share that with them. Really reassure them.
Fantastic. Chief Inspector Matt, do you have anything that you want to add? I'm just mindful that most of the questions have been council related and we have invited you here. Do you have any pearls of wisdom you want to leave us with?
No, I don't think so. I think that the biggest crime challenge for Newham, and again, this is nothing new, is certainly robbery. So in the last 4 weeks, we've had over 100 robberies for Newham. Stratford and Newtown and East Ham Central are the sort of big hotspots for it. And again, there's plans around some offender management and some target hardening. But that's the sort of real focus. It didn't really see that much difference during lockdown. But no, I mean, Chair, unless there's any specific questions for me, no, I don't have anything specific to raise or any concerns or asks, so to speak, of yourself or councillors.
No worries. Thank you very much. Councillor Master, I'll give you one last bite of the cherry. Thank you.
Really, really quick one. You're saying there have been loads of robberies. Are you talking about muggings, or are you talking about more the kind of burglary end or shoplifting? I mean, yeah.
So these are all personal robberies. So yeah, application of violence whilst a theft. So they're all sort of robberies of personal properties, nothing to do with businesses or commercial. Yeah, literally. Muggings, I suppose, in old money, and they're so concentrated, which is good in one sense, that we can really focus police resourcing. But again, the frustration is that if I say that it's places around Westfield, Stratford and Newtown, Canning Town, North, the same sort of places, and it's a relatively small cohort of people that are committing the offences, and a relatively small victim profile, particularly around school-aged children. So the frustrations are huge, but we've just got to really give it everything we've got, and that's definitely the plan for Newham. I would say, from a policing point of view, all roads sort of point to robbery for the next few weeks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Garfield. Go on.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm taking a look at the new enforcement service structure compared to the old one, so one that's significantly less resourced, but definitely restructured. to what degree, from each of your perspectives, so from you, Matt, and from you, Councillor Beckles as well, and Alva as well, please, to what degree do you think that this new structure and the decreased resourcing is going to have a direct impact on the enforcement and management of crime in the borough?
I must interject to just say you've got 1 minute each maximum. Thank you.
Okay, shall I go first, Chair? Right, so 1 minute, I'm going to speak really quickly, deliberately. The first thing I want to say is our full sympathy for Newham as a local authority, because Alva and Councillor Beckles are right. They're spending pretty much the same amount of cash that they've done for years on their number, but because MOPAC have moved the goalpost, it just means you get a lot less. The impact of it will be that some things the police are obviously compelled to do, crime disorder, maintenance of peace, investigate those sorts of things. The impact will be on the stuff that the police don't always get involved in terms of our priorities that we have done in Newham for a long time: fly tipping, noise nuisance, landlord visits, etc. For me, those are the sorts of things that are going to be harder to do in partnership. Some things we're always going to do because that's just what the police are for. But those sorts of things that are not bespoke to Newham, but that Newham have experienced for a long time in terms of the policing partnership, that's the sort of things that the local policing provision will have to say no to, where when we've given you 40 cops to do it as you wish with, they've always said yes. And that's going to be a difficult position, I think.
Thank you. Alva?
Yes, I agree with Matt in relation to the EPT resource. In relation to the rest of the resource, I think a different way of working has a lot of merits. In terms of a lot more partnership working, a lot more crime prevention work rather than a responsive service, a lot more problem solving. So crime prevention is an important part of community safety. And to a great extent, I would say there hasn't been a lot of that work in Newham so far. We've done a lot of crime response, and to that extent, the council has been fairly responsive and reactive. The position that the new structure will put us in is much more partnership work with the police. The CCTV service, for example, will be a key part of the community safety service rather than a kind of reactive arm of the council. We'll be doing much more proactive work to prevent crime, to work with vulnerable and identify and work with vulnerable people, but also identify our threats and our risky residents who are causing more threats to others. So it's a better balance between managing vulnerable people and dealing with risks, and also the collaborative approach that we're pursuing. I think that has a lot of merits as well.
Thank you, Alva. Councillor Beckles, just 1 minute, last remarks.
Thanks. As I would say, it's challenging, but it does include better partnership working, us being more proactive, better use of resources, and our facilities like CCTV. If you look at where that 1.4 million's gone, it was seed money for brighter futures. So how do we use our youth workers and our outreach team better, and in partnership and collaboration with the community safety team, working better with housing and public health, who you've heard from, especially around sex workers and along the Romford Road, which I know a few councillors are suffering the impact from. So challenging, but better approach towards being more proactive and not just an enforcement-led service.
Thank you so much, Councillor Beckles. I want to join Chief Inspector Matt Casey in just commending Councillor Beckles and Alva on the work that you're doing with the reduced budget. Don't think that we don't see it. We see it. We see the challenges. And yes, at times it may feel as though we give you a bit of a rough ride here on this committee, but that's our job, to sharpen you and make you more focused, to make sure that we give our residents the very best. So we do see it, and we do commend you for your work, and we thank you for it. And in fact, Councillor Beckles touched on my final remarks. It's the summary slide at the end of your report, which says, by investing in the safety of young people, the council is making clear its intention to create a safer and more resilient community, not only for now, but also for the future. And it actually made me think that in actual fact, we may need to get the Brighter Futures Directorate here before us to find out what sort of weight they're pulling in this issue, to make sure that they use their money to deliver on crime reduction, especially for young people in the borough. So I want to thank Councillor Beckles for that, because it seems our minds were aligned at that point. So thank you very much for attending, Alva. Thank you very much for attending, James, and Chief Inspector Matt Casey. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. Feel free to leave now or stay till the end, but we'll be moving on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 8, our work programme. Can I ask that members email Roger with any suggestions that they have for our work programme moving forward? Our next meeting may not be in December due to a build-up of meetings of budget and COVID, but we will obviously be back sooner rather than later. Moving on to item number 9, the date of the next meeting. We haven't yet set a date for the next meeting, but I'll be working with officers to set a date. And once we do know, we will obviously inform the rest of the committee. I want to thank everybody for attending, and this concludes the business of the committee. And I now declare the meeting closed at 8:55. Thank you very much, everybody, for your efforts this evening. Thank you.